each time I got more information, I became more involved because of the absence of critical information. And they're hoping to wear me out. And like I said, I may not be breathing long, but as long as I'm breathing, I'm going to work on this. Because that family is just as sad today as it was, the day of the tragedy. And so they deserve it.
So how do you think Tamla died?
I know she didn't die the way that the conclusion has been reached. I just don't know why she was moved and placed there. And I don't know who did it, but I have a good idea from statements and inconsistencies. And when you have law enforcement or people related to law enforcement that take the fifth, or that, don't produce records, or that the records have all been deleted, or that texts have all been erased, that's, I mean, think of the other side. I've tried over 315 jury trials. I lost count. So I've tried a lot of cases, and many, let's say 200 have been criminal cases. And I have to always torture myself by indicating that, when you're selecting a jury, you believe where there's smoke, there's fire. Everybody, yes, yeah, of course, what else? So, well, in criminal case, you got to explain that, okay? Just because somebody's been charged, you believe they're guilty? Sure. I mean, why wouldn't they? You think the police are lying? Maybe they're mistaken, but it's like a recording. And so then you have to go and you have to branch out. And did you ever get a traffic ticket? Did you challenge it? No. Yes. Oh, there you go. Finally. Why? Because I was not guilty. So then you have to demean yourself, appreciate the seriousness of it, to get somebody to finally agree that not everybody that's charged is guilty, but really nobody believes it. You have an awesome task ahead of you to convince the people to go against their common, ordinary sense that the prosecution always tells them to rely upon, and that I used to say when I was a prosecutor representing the people. All right, so now we have this case. And so all I have is we have the things that don't make sense. If you read the GBI inquiry, which stops abruptly, for instance, in the SIM card event, the destruction, they go, well, what did you do about that? That is a crime. There's no statute of limitations issue. You have to, somebody just told you, if you're investigating somebody's house for domestic violence and you see that it's got 200 kilos of fentanyl, you don't just walk out. You raised your hand and you swore you're going to uphold the law. You're not going to dishonor your badge. You're going to say, oh my God, this is the first allegation that seems to have some validity, because we've heard it from multiple people, that the sheriff's office didn't want those things out and that they destroyed the evidence. And already, if it was a singular claim, you may be dismissive of it. If it's corroborated by people of questionable veracity, okay. But if now you have Barrera talking to Caleb, going to the gym with a case agent that he never told anybody about until the girlfriend said it. Oh, they were going to the gym. They were great friends at the gym. They talked all the time, and he denies it at some point in time, saying that, no, we saw each other at it. Like, if you work together, what are the chances two guys aren't going to sit down and talk about stuff, all kinds of stuff? They're going to talk about the Falcons getting beat by the Bucks, and they're going to talk about, ladies, if you are this guy who's the most prolific, whatever you want to claim, or me that I'm going to keep to myself. And which I still don't understand because I've seen this picture. But anyway, the idea being, like in the calls from the scene and the Snapchats and the texts and all this kind of stuff. And then like allegations that Christian made at the very end, said, I saw, an indentation on the ground where she fell. That's nowhere anywhere. Nobody's ever mentioned that. And then how he believes that it didn't happen that way, how her body was moved late, how he feels that he was being framed. I mean, when you talk to GBI and you lie to them, you commit an offense. Hello. So that has tremendous validity, particularly if it flies into the conflict of all this other stuff. So if you have the worst investigation possible, and you have facts that you cannot deny, such as it is impossible, if she fell there with these catastrophic fractures, that she moved a foot. It's impossible that the issue with the arms, it's impossible to move at all if there is nothing underneath her fingernails showing that she was trying to claw to that. It's impossible if there's no blood flow on the ground from the serious Smith fracture on her wrist that would bleed like somebody who got cut with a knife, unless it was post-mortem. That means the fracture happened after she was dead. And so these things, jump out. You have a GBI, who supposedly is a reviewing authority, that did not mention in the report the exhaustive claims that I made, although they quoted me, in reference to providing information and not providing something that they could have got by subpoena like they got everything else. Of course, like, well, Mr. Fernandez didn't send us that. Well, I gave them the guy's name and everything. They have it anywhere from a bunch of sources. Second, they can see some of it on the internet on the leaked material. And they didn't want to touch that because they took 5 pictures in an autopsy protocol of a potential homicide at GBI, not at the quack outfit down the street of the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, where the corruption is rampant. No, at GBI, Koopmeyer took, his guy took 5 pics fully dressed. So of course you're not going to have pics on the table of the scratches that they somehow touch upon, but which Dr. Shaker identified as clearly 4 to 5 centimeters, which are defensive in nature. So
So
what
I
was
was
she
going to
having?
ask, what did the independent autopsy reveal that was different than what the GBI stated?
Well, I'll tell you a lot, but some of the critical notes are this. There is no evidence of any significant injuries to the skull bones or the cervical vertebrae. The cause of death, as attributed to Koopmeyer's, was that she died of a fracture of C2, the second cervical level. Well, that wasn't, the independent guy didn't find a fracture there. Not only that, the absence of the subcutaneous subgaleal hemorrhage or laceration of the scalp and depressed lineal fraction of the calvareal bones, which is a scientific basis to indicate that if you fall flat, you're not going to just have a fracture, a compression fracture, or you're not going to have just that. You're going to have some damage up to the top because you just supposedly fell, not from what the initial assessment was by Barrera calling, first of all, after he moved the body and then denied it. Second, when he said it's 20 feet, which is not, because it sounds better for, some other thing, but I mean, it's not. And so then you get all this information and you go, wait, nothing makes sense here. It's just a combination of inconsistencies, including that. Why would GBI ever? I mean, they've never done it. Taking 5 pics of a body dressed to find out what kind of injury she had. I mean, talk about a fix on the.
Is there anything in the independent autopsy that indicates how she did actually die?
No, but it says, well, there's so many findings that it would need further review. And I don't want to speculate upon it because then it may link it directly to something. But what happens is we know it couldn't be from that fall. So already that's what it is. How much time was spent disregarding that, dismissing that, and exploring further? The camera wasn't working after they volunteered the camera. After it's long gone, GBI, not Forsyth County, tries to get the record of when the camera failed. The Google to see who was there, who was not. Now they did investigate Leander. You got to figure this out, and I hate to say it, but if you got a black guy in the area, it doesn't matter if it's a husband or not. That might be the guy that killed the woman. So I mean, this is a very conservative town, very conservative, and I'm sure it's full of really good people, but statistically speaking, I don't think it's a fair shake kind of place. And so, and I think that attitude, went on to the sheriff's office, but that's what I'm talking about. You think about this, 7 black girls and 1 blonde, and the blonde wakes up dead after there were 3 black men also in the house. Would we be in the same location, or would we 9 people in jail opening night. I'm serious. That's what happens everywhere. That's why we are where we are at this juncture, because nobody wants to talk about the fact that there's still all this underlying.
So do you think, I'm going to ask this question, then you might see me move, but just go ahead
That's
and
fine.
respond. Do you think that this was poor execution in the initial investigation or an intentional cover-up from the beginning?
I think it was both, and it's hard to win them all, so to speak. We don't know what was at play, and these people didn't care to pursue it. Just like right now, I don't understand how GBI doesn't have a collateral investigation into the sheriff's office level of corruption if they have allegations and they can disprove them that the phone was, that was open involuntarily when a witness came in and said, here are the pictures from the scene, and they destroyed them. And there's no preservation of that. I mean, that's why they have polygraphs. Speaking of which, did Barrera take one when they asked him? Of course not. He's not going to do anything like that. Why would he fail a polygraph? Because he knows something about it. He knows something about it. He knows something about it, whether he did it or somebody else did it or not. He knows something about it. Too much, too much. It's like he said he hadn't moved the arms, and he's already made statements inconsistent with that. He cleared the cigarettes. There were 2 kinds, of cigarettes up there. Very few people smoke 2 kinds of cigarettes. There's something, not right. There's, some of the players here. What we do know, by the way, is this, that for sure there was a break of the law in Georgia, a distribution of Xanax illegally between a number of people. We know that, but again, in a Black Death investigation, why are you going to lock up the whites on their own admissions, in Forsyth County? But we're not going to go there. And I'm not suggesting, that's appropriate or not, but that's what cops do. When they find a crime, they enforce it. Because they go, wait, they enforce the law. They go, hey, wait. This is what we found. We can't just ignore that. So what happens is that all that would apply pressure to getting to the bottom of this. And that's what it is. Everybody has made inconsistent statements. Everybody has suggested that that it was a tragic accident. There have been even suggestions on the record that somebody knows what happened, but it was an accident. And it wasn't quite this way, but it was an accident. You don't pursue that. And so that's what I'm saying. So Forsyth County did a horrible job. They covered up stuff. They knew that they had a loose cannon in their lap. He's the case agent. He goes out there. He already makes findings inconsistent. First, he publishes, that she tripped and fell on the ground face flat, and died. Somebody that's in great shape, So that's stupid, And so, I mean, but the fact that got around means that the sheriff should have called him in and said, hey, listen, you'll be doing parking citations around the courthouse for the next 2 years, my friend. But
were you ever able to independently test her bodily fluids? Were you ever able to really independently test her blood alcohol content?
No.
Or what was in her system?
No, and we have there's preservation, but here's what we did. By that time, and I know that there could be something that impacted, by that time we knew that this was a physical confrontation in terms of my review of the evidence. And then what I was confronted with is that I think you well know that there was a particular person that was delving into this initially very helpful, and then that just turned out to be a disaster, a loose cannon. And then, for whatever the reason, just branched off into just, the wild blue yonder. And luckily I never had any contact with that person directly, because I wanted to, from the inception, I said, this may be a potential conflict if I give advice to one person when I'm doing this. Luckily, I would have had to deal with it. And so, everybody has speculated. We have some of the worst of all in this case. We have the medical examiner. Now, this is how I look at things. GBI. I contacted GBI. The family contacted GBI. There's a lot of, but I contacted GBI and so forth, and we asked for some stuff. Now, there's no entries about Ralph Fernandez, the attorney for the family, respectfully doing a job he's done elsewhere without any problems. But that's not annotated. But yet, there's a reference in it about some guy that somebody else outside the investigation contracted to examine the findings, and without any supporting evidence. I guess he might have read the newspaper accounts, you know, then he calls GBI, the medical examiner says, hey, you guys did a great job. I agree with you. But the notes don't even reflect what he may be in agreement with. But that shows, why would law enforcement place that in there and not include the comments of doubt about why do you only have 5 pictures? Or where are the scratches? You know, why didn't you note those scratches? Or is there a problem because there was no fracture?
So is it too late to test the bodily fluid? I mean, even if it's a physical altercation, if her blood alcohol content level isn't what they were saying, isn't that also supporting evidence that their narrative is incorrect?
It would be helpful, but there's other threshold issues to arrive at that. Because what happens is this, that I'm not suggesting it's unreliable, just like there was a trace Xanax in her system, just like, you know, and if you look, but the good thing is the exoneration from all kinds of things, you know, because for all I know, they could have pinned 10 things on her. But here's what we have. We have the videos, we have the time, we have the you know, the testimony, we have, and then we have this thing. It's just like anybody would have reservation about saying, wait, if you claim a catastrophic injury right there, how did she get over there? And how is there no blood on the ground? Like, how can there be no blood with a Smith fracture? That means you got your bones coming out, tugging. You know,
And
like,
isn't the blood on top of the sleeve, not on the bottom of the sleeve?
the slight bit of blood is not in the correct location either, but still it's only a couple of drops, which is consistent with a dead body. I mean, that's, as soon as you get there and you go, oh my God, there's no blood. And she's got a huge injury there. This is a homicide.
So
I mean,
I guess I'm just asking
guy,
about the bodily fluid because someone had suggested that it might have been destroyed. Does it still exist? Is it destroyed?
there
Or is
may
it just...
be, you know, in others, you know, I'm optimistic that Dr. Shaker made some preservation of some of the material that he got. But we had to jump ahead because we've been on the defensive position in this case, from outside and from within. I represent the husband. I represent, you know, the principal. I represent the mother, the sister-in-law, Terry Blanco, who has been so helpful and instrumental from the inception. She's the one who brought me the case at the same time that we were doing some other cases that were really an imposition on this firm. And she said, please help this family. Please help me. Please help my brother, Leander. You know, we know from the contact with law enforcement that they don't care about us and they're doing a poor job. Can you help us? And that's what I'm saying. That's how I became involved. I never thought it would end up being 1,000 hours.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 500 hours into.
So that's something you could end up doing later down the road if you feel like it would be beneficial. Is
yeah,
kind of
yeah. I'm not excluding.
So just devil's advocate for a moment, because you know it's the question or the statements that a lot of people are making is, you know, not all these people were friends, close friends. Some wouldn't have a motivation to cover up for somebody else, or at least not to the risk or extent that a murder case would warrant. I mean, maybe they're telling the truth. It's really hard to get that many people to kind of agree on anything, let alone a potential homicide. So maybe they're telling the truth. Any chance?
No. And there's a reason for that. I understand the logic and the implications of exactly what you've said. They didn't know each other well, some of them, but they knew each other well enough. Like, I don't know about you, but I would never spend the night in somebody's house that I don't know. And that's like a threshold issue. Wait, I know they don't know each other very well, but time out. Think about the concept of, you know, Bill Smith inviting you to spend the night at his house and you don't know Bill because he's a friend of one of your friends. They knew each other well enough. They had relationships that developed later. They appropriately distance themselves from the case. And I'm not suggesting, because somebody was casting aspersions on others within, and I'm not, that's not what it is. It's just the bottom line. Let's not get distracted from the fact that she had injuries that were prompted after she was dead. A dead body can't break an arm like that. It's not moving. It's not, it's not bleeding. There's no blood on the ground. Before they stepped all over the yard and the quality of work that Forsyth County did, there was no indentation. Tammy, if supposedly fell from the 15 feet and hit the ground, the first thing I checked was the ground frozen? Because then, you might say there's no indentation. The ground is tough, but that would leave some kind of indentation enough or sufficient enough so that people would actually be able to notice the point of impact. There was no point of impact in this case. But more importantly, there was no blood anywhere. And the only dirt was in the back of her pants. Hello, let's see. Nobody made a claim that she had dirty pants at any time. There are no photographs showing that the back of her pants are dirty. Soil,
I knew there was,
meaning not, like brown. So maybe she got dragged backwards, but that's what I'm saying. There's so many of these babies that you go, well, the first thing is this. She could have fallen and killed herself and ended up over there. That's the thing. So where did she die and how? Well, we got the scratches. Forsyth County didn't annotate it, and GBI kept the shirt on for the 5 pictures instead of the 300. I talked to, I prosecuted some death cases in the sense that, not very proud of what I did when I was a prosecutor in retrospect, but I likewise defended, people who've been accused of homicides and shootings and, whatever many. And so you build up relationships with the lead death prosecutors, meaning the guys that know that do the first degree murder cases, and that's exclusively what they do. And I know them in Miami, I know them, here in Tampa and Tallahassee and Jacksonville. But there's one that I respect more than anybody because he's just the fairest and the best. And I occasionally would call him in this case. I said, hey man, I'm a little consulting here for free, He goes, what now? I said, listen, let me ask you. So you have you have an accident, and so there goes to the medical examiner. And how many, well, first of all, the cop's there. If it's any kind of maybe. But assuming not, still the medical examiner, how many pictures do they take? He said, well, I guess to keep their license, they have to take, 200-300 pictures because you never know what's going to unfold once the body's gone. And I said, well, how about 5? And he said, come on, Ralph, are you senile? Are you senile? Are you lying to me just to upset me because you keep interrupting me with that case? And so then the idea being, listen, it's never happened before. He speaks at national conferences. He knows how many pictures they take. Why would they take 5 if it wasn't by design? And why didn't they take her clothes off to show the defensive wounds when they were already sketched elsewhere, and they kind of knew about it. But nobody made a reference to that.
I have seen some pictures where she's got grass on her face. And it looks like little bubbles might be coming out of her mouth. There's no grass on her clothes. Do you think she was still alive when people were circling around her?
I don't believe that.
Okay.
I believe she was dying when the first people circled around her, wherever that happened, or whoever that happened. There's also an inconsistency in time for her when the last time he saw her, but he came downstairs the final time, and it was only them 2, by his own statements. Law enforcement dismissed that. That's part of latent inconsistencies. But everybody, here's what I think. I think that there's a little bit of inbreeding between all these people in there. And I think that part of it is this. I think Christian was unfit for this task. I think he didn't deserve to wear a badge. He doesn't. I think that served a purpose at the time. You allow your worst to handle a case in which maybe one of your own is involved, and don't clue them in.
You are going to put together your report. Do you have a timeline that you hope to be able to pull this together? Months, years? I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, here's what happens. What happens is that this is a classical case of the line in the sand being moved. You know, it's kind of like the more I was ready to move and say this is terrible, the more a wealth of information came in. GBI, again, I think they did a thorough job. You know, they did a pretty thorough job. Didn't explore anything that was not convenient to explore, but that's it. And I sense that because they record. Florida is a two-party state. You can't record something. They recorded me in a one-party state, which is fine. I mean, that's out there. What's good about that is this. There's suggestions that are made in the report that I kind of didn't send what I said I was going to send, but there's no reference, meaning I send them after they were rather skeptic about this. They kind of, during that conversation, the tone of when I sent him the Snapchat or whatever the texts were between Christian and all that, where he was making fun in a very damaging racial way. I hope you post them, you know, when you do them so that you know what I'm dealing. They were skeptical about receiving that kind of, you know, like, oh, you know, and so I remember that. And so I said, let me see how this flies. I wanted to, one part of it was, listen, keep me abreast of stuff. Well, we want to talk to Leander and send us a report. Yeah, but, you know, I don't want you just to be dismissive about it. I mean, I want to see if you guys are doing some stuff here, you know, some work here, not just repeating the same old stuff. And so very defensive. And so then with the agents, and so then, you know, I followed up and I noticed that there's no recording of that conversation in the report. When I said, hey, you have a conflict, there's a leak in your office. There's a general reference to that, but I didn't see that recording. And they record everything, including the other contacts with me. So they had an in-house problem. And after that, they never called or texted or did anything again. That's the reason that I didn't send them, because I want to say, hey, what are you doing with it? I'm not a cop. Why am I going to give you all my stuff when I'm telling you already? Because I told what it was. Listen, can't be. You can't. If you're living in a traumatic event, even a 15 to 35-second death approach, the amount of blood being squirted out in that high stress event, when people tragically are dying, you know, you talk about the system functioning fast to save the body, which means your heart is pumping like it never pumped before, which means more blood comes out. That's why people at crime scene, death scenes and all that, they go, oh my God, look at all this blood. Well, because in many of these cases, the body's trying to save itself. And so everything is fight or flight, retention, expression, you know, one or the other, you know, short of breath, too much, you know, accelerated. So all these things happen. And I'm not an expert in dying, but other people are. And the idea is that in this case, that's what happened. You cannot explain the movement, you can't. And then the inconsistencies about the arm. And the reason is, if it's like this, how did the person move at all from the fall if the arms are behind you? We got to have at least one arm that way. You know, like, but that one didn't have anything on it. So then you go, oh, that didn't work out. So already from the inception is, hey, listen, if we're unfit to do this, let's try to get some help from somebody who knows how to do it. But then it goes back to what I told you. But it's better if this is a fall.
So I mean, with all that said, do you have like a goal,
Yeah,
a hope of when you want to kind of get this out to the world?
Yeah, hopefully sufficient time before the next Georgia election that'll consume the cycle for a year, regardless of what happens. Mm-hmm. And I say that because I want you to know, I always like to express this to my minority brothers and sisters. I'm Cuban. And so I kind of, it's the old story of I swam over here too many years ago when I was a child. I technically didn't swim, but you know, like, so I'm not very judgmental about minorities and about immigrants because I'm one of them, you know? And so you never walk away from that. And Cubans are really well known to forget where they came from. And they're the proudest Americans in the sense that they don't like any Mexicans. They don't like any of the other brown people. We're better than them. We're not. We're just one of them. And them is what makes America great and has been always making America great. Immigration has made America great. All right. And that's why we've been a great country all along. But the time is this, let's say 6 months. What happens is that I got caught up in something that I think is going to bring down an agency in Florida, an agency of Ron DeSantis. And so I've had to juggle that with this, and that has a shorter timeline. And then I had a couple of minor, health events, surgeries, like a prostate removal and this and that, a couple other cancers that went away successfully. And so they have kind of, they made me less vicious, but I'm back. And the prognosis is fabulous, so that while I'm breathing, Forsyth County is in trouble.
So you're hoping maybe before the end of this year.
But of next year, yes. But and the reason is I have to make a move on this after January because of what I took. And let me tell you why. Yeah. Because there's no doubt in my mind, had not the national conscience changed with all the events that were surrounding the killings of African Americans on video. That's why I like to always say that, because it would be very difficult if it's not on video, that this case would be anywhere where it's at. GBI would not have undertaken this task. What happens is that the national tragedies emphasized or opened the door, or you name whatever, so that cases like this would have at least some public interest. And then we had the benefit of people picking it up and running with it. And it's my fault for not having more aggressively publicized speculation that would have inflamed people towards the objective that I think I will be able to establish within reason, but professional reason. And that's why I need to put the package together and bring it together, even if later it's supplemented.
So you're going to put this report together. Who is going to really be your audience? I mean, Forsyth County, they're not going to reopen it. GBI is going to say, we already did that. Is this target hoping that the FBI will pick it up? That, like, who are you hoping is going to take it seriously and take the next step?
I'm hoping a lot of people, that the people do it, that people who promote this cause do it, the cause that we are all living through and in.
But who do you think should investigate this at this point?
Well, the problem is this, every time anybody criticizes, it's kind of like the critic, Roosevelt's writing about everybody on the outside can suggest what you should do. And I always say, if you're in the pit, you're the one who knows what you have to do, particularly if you welcome volunteers. But in this case, the problem is that if you have no police misconduct in the affirmative way, they didn't shoot or maim anybody or hit anybody, then you have no direct cause of action. If you have no basis to file a lawsuit, when you don't know if it was a crime or negligence or whatever, and you can't plead alternative theories in Georgia, despite the fact that I tried to follow the suggestion, and we contacted the top lawyers in Georgia about a potential civil suit, each one said there's no case here. So I would not have the power subpoena that I was seeking so that I could expand my inquiry. But in good faith, no Georgia lawyer would help me with a case in that capacity, because I said, this is what it is. It's an alternative theory. So I've done it, but you got to be a powerhouse to do it. And nobody in Georgia for a limited amount of money would do it. If there had been a $10 million policy, perhaps there would have, but there wasn't. And so as a result, I couldn't get into the court system in Georgia, and I couldn't get the assistance of federal authorities because it wasn't within their jurisdiction. Not that I tried, but I'm sure that in the past year, they've been more receptive to these kind of cases. Before, absolutely not. So
is your hope maybe change of leadership in Forsyth, and then they'll do a real significant internal investigation, or that the GBI will take a second look, but with a different investigator?
Listen, I think that if at some point in time they go, she didn't fall there, I think that's a victory for the family. She didn't die that way.